From being hailed as a world-class talent and chased relentlessly by multiple teams to feeling depressed by a season he says has been everything but good, Carlos Sainz has not had the start to his post-Ferrari F1 career he expected. Recovering former giant Williams threw everything at Sainz to get him to pick it as his new employer after being dumped by Ferrari to make room for Lewis Hamilton. Since his signing was announced last summer, Sainz has been the big totem of the James Vowles-led Williams revival. A race-winning driver at the top of his game, picking the team that finished second to last in the championship last year because he is so convinced by the project. But the excitement and expectation has not been reflected on track. Sainz has been second best to teammate Alex Albon, who is probably surprising quite a few people, even inside Williams, with how good he looks with Sainz alongside him. Worse still, Sainz has had pretty woeful luck this year. This has exaggerated the gap between them. While Albon is flying high in 8th on 46 points at the halfway stage of the championship and winning F1's unofficial Class B fight outside the top 4 teams, Sainz is 15th in the standings and has scored just 13 points so far. If this trend continued to the end of 2025, it would mark Sainz's worst season in F1 since his rookie year back in 2015. That's despite Sainz thinking Williams' car performance has exceeded his expectations of what the team could do immediately in 2025, and that if it was nailing this season, its two drivers could be 7th and 8th in the championship and pulling away from the midfield. But he says Williams isn't ready as a team to hit that level yet, and he's not been consistently at his best either. Throw in more than his fair share of bad luck and you start to quickly understand why 2025 is going so wrong for Sainz and where Williams' own slump fits in. Sainz has scored points 6 times in 12 events so far, but has not finished higher than 8th in a race for Williams this season. He crashed out of the opener in the wet on the opening lap in Australia, accident damage forced him to retire in Bahrain, and he didn't even make the start of the Grand Prix in Austria due to a brake problem that led to a fire. An unseen incident late in the most recent race at Silverstone, the halfway point of 2025, left Sainz exasperated as it felt symptomatic of his season so far. A replay on the main feed only showed half of what happened. Charles Leclerc taking a tight line on the wet part of the track into the fast slow right-hander while on slicks, having a slide, then running through the gravel. What was not shown was what happened to the opponent, who was Sainz. He had attacked Leclerc for 8th place and pressured his old Ferrari teammate into defending on slicks on the damp inside line. When Leclerc had his wobble and slid wide, Sainz should have picked up the pieces, except he was so far alongside the Ferrari that Leclerc took Sainz with him. Finishing outside the points as a result was well short of what Sainz deserved in that race, but unfortunately is indicative of how his first season at Williams is constantly being undermined by different issues. Sainz has scored 1 point in the last 4 races and admitted after Silverstone he's a bit fed up that something always happens out of his control, before adding, "I welcome this 2-week break to see if something changes in my life so we can start having an F1 season, because this has been everything but good so far." While that was slightly melodramatic, the situation is clearly taking its toll on Sainz, who joined Williams with immense enthusiasm and with a fantastic reception for the team, but has so far had to suffer through a very trying first season. What seemed to hurt most at Silverstone was that Sainz has often stressed how much he felt Williams' own execution has been lacking at times this year, but it had got Silverstone mostly right, only to be denied late on by another driver's error. That sucker punch was hard to take and just the latest of many, as Sainz said it's becoming extremely frustrating and depressing to be putting in so much work only to suffer from things out of his control. In addition to the circumstances conspiring against Sainz at times, he's also generally just been a bit slower than Albon. When Williams beat a Ferrari in back-to-back races in May, that overachievement was a great symbol of its progress and its status as the clear midfield benchmark, and at the time, it was a comfortable 5th in the championship. But even during that mighty start, Sainz wasn't particularly happy. He was very vocal about the time needed to maximise his own adaptation to a new car. He spoke about how much he was struggling with the inherent limitation this generation of Williams has had in long corners that combine steering lock and braking on entry, and how the driving style he'd honed at Ferrari was exaggerating it. But his form versus Albon hasn't drastically improved as he's become more familiar with the car and the team. If anything, he's had bigger misses recently. Overall, the two are quite evenly matched, though in almost every area, Albon has a small but decisive advantage. He's made it to Q3 7 times in 12 attempts, plus twice in both sprint qualifying sessions held so far. Sainz has 5 main Q3 appearances and none in the sprint format. Similarly, Albon has made it through to Q2 11 times, only being eliminated in Q1 once, which was in Bahrain, where he should have progressed but for the FIA missing a track limits offence by Nico Hülkenberg and only realising it too late. Sainz has been knocked out in Q1 3 times, all of which have come in the last 5 events, although the early Canada exit was a result of being badly impeded. Clearly, the trend of the season is that Albon gets a little bit more out of the car over a single lap, and Sainz has struggled more of late, which has coincided with Williams finding the going tougher in the midfield. More on the significance of that in a moment. But even though Albon's got the better qualifying record so far, it's not like Sainz is nowhere, and that's also reflected in the lap time difference. Again, Albon has the edge, but it's incredibly close between them. On average, Sainz has been 700 slower in Q1, 400 slower across the 8 times both cars have made it into Q2, and 600 slower on the 3 occasions both have made it all the way to Q3. And of the 23 times both cars have been in the same qualifying segment, Albon's been faster 13 times to Sainz's 10. The evidence of 2025 as a whole indicates Sainz has trailed Albon, but by very little. But what's more worrying than the overall record so far this year is the recent trend. Sainz has been slower in 6 of the last 7 qualifying segments they've both participated in, with his average deficit creeping up to over 2/10 in that time. That is exaggerated by circumstances like the Canada impeding incident and a mix of damage and a brake issue causing a horrible Austria Q1 exit, but it also includes a drubbing in Q2 in Monaco, where Sainz felt he'd gone back 7 places in his efforts to adjust his driving and setup to what the Williams demands. That's probably more indicative of slightly messy weekends undoing Sainz's efforts in qualifying, but it's still a trend he needs to rectify. One problem for Sainz is that he may have missed the Williams peak, which means even if he does have better weekends or outqualifies Albon like he did at Silverstone, it doesn't yield the same results it would have done early in the season. The first half of the year has come in 2 contrasting parts for Williams. The first 8 races up to and including Monaco in May were prolific, 54 points, more than double the next best team in the midfield. Sainz, while undeniably less competitive than Albon in this phase, was unlucky not to score bigger in that period. His early qualifying weakness left him nowhere on the grid in China and Japan, but he got on top of this quite well. He made it into Q2 every time and had 5 Q3 appearances in the first 7 races. But damage cost him a good score in Bahrain, and a mix of operational issues and unfortunate race circumstances limited him in Miami and Imola, where big hauls were possible and Albon had his best weekends, hence trailing Albon 42-12 in points across the first 8 races. Since then, Williams has struggled for various reasons, and Sainz has had bigger qualifying setbacks. He's made it into Q2 just once in the last 4 events with no Q3 appearances in that time, whereas Albon's been in Q2 every time, got into Q3 once and was annoyed not to do so again at Silverstone. What's immediately obvious about the Williams season divide is that the 2 parts are split very obviously by the flexi-wing clampdown that came at the Spanish Grand Prix in June, so it's very tempting to point to that as part of the problem. But correlation doesn't equal causation, and while it may be a factor, we don't know for sure, especially as several other factors complicate the picture. Williams has been weaker relative to its opposition, but it's still been competitive. And having overachieved in the first part of the year, it's been underachieving recently due to a mix of strategic missteps and reliability problems, plus a bit of bad luck. Sometimes it's not maximised qualifying because of tyre preparation, or suffering on Sundays with things like brake cooling issues in Canada and Austria on Sainz's car, or an internal Williams cooling problem that caused back-to-back retirements for Albon in Canada and Austria. Other times though, Williams has simply succumbed to more pressure from below. Williams had been stressing during its peak of the Miami and Imola weekends that it didn't expect to maintain its strong form indefinitely because of a big development choice. It switched deliberately early to focusing on its 2026 car because of the all-new technical regulations coming into force next year. A strategy Williams knew could mean sacrificing better results because getting next year right means a good foundation for several seasons to follow. And Williams has started to suffer for that strategy, as Sainz and Albon have watched direct rivals get some nice upgrades in the last few races. Early 2025 backmarkers Aston Martin and Sauber have been the biggest turnarounds. Aston Martin has had the 5th fastest car since Imola, while Sauber's upgrades have made it the most prolific midfield scorer in that time, and Nico Hülkenberg even got a podium at Silverstone. And the midfield is so condensed that these upgrades plus just general execution on any given weekend means the pecking order can shift race to race. There is one final Williams upgrade coming which should help, but whether Williams can recover its early 2025 peak is unclear, and even if it does, Williams and Sainz both need to be at the top of their game to make the most of it, something that hasn't been the case often enough so far at the start of this much vaunted partnership.